you call them reservations, and those who are off reserve. We have sizable number of our people go into urban communities and often coalesce around different kinds of organizations that have been created to improve the quality of life of our people off reserve. So we established a national board of 20 people, 10 Rotarians, 10 Indigenous peoples. And I'll share my screen. Oh, it won't let me share my screen. I can tell you about it. We established let me quickly call this up on another device. We established a vision statement and mission statement for the organization. And let me find it. So our vision is that all Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples will work together, interconnected and interdependent for the benefit of future generations. Our mission is to catalyze societal change by inspiring Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationship building, strengthening community well-being, and advancing the next generation of leaders. We see this as a mutual education process. So it's going to be important to take the time to engage in relationship building. Time is critical. We need to be able to build understanding with one another. In Canada, a couple of years ago, there was a national outcry over the discovery of bodies which had been found buried next to a former residential school in unmarked graves. We know from an inquiry that occurred here, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that over 4,000 children died in residential schools. One of the quotes that goes around here quite often is, how many schools do you know of that have a burial ground attached to them? Well, it's not unusual with residential schools. Kids died there. Some were killed. And there was testimony to that fact. Many Canadians were unaware, and it's been a shock to their system. In a country that's known as a peace-loving country, that has a good reputation around the world for their peaceful activities. It was a shock to many to find out that their country had engaged in such activities. And people want to do something about it. They want to learn more. They want to be able to reach out and to not only find out more about us, but to find out more about themselves. So we're in an interesting time, and I think it's a good time for us to have an organization like Rotary Hip that can bring people together, that can engage in timely conversations, and ultimately we can do projects together. One of the best projects we have going is our Youth to Youth project initiative, where we're bringing together youth from Indigenous communities, youth from mainstream Canadians, and having them do things together, whether it's creating community gardens or having outdoor learning experiences with traditional knowledge keepers. It's building a greater understanding. So we're finding a lot of success with that. There's a lot of interest in it, and it's something we're quite proud of at Rotary Hip. So I'll stop it there. I think that was enough of an overview for now, and hopefully there'll be questions later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great, Tim.
Yes, and I'll mention that we're just starting that process in the U.S. Just enumerating where the boarding schools are, that's been a fairly recent phenomena. So Angela, would you like to talk next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Again, excited to be here as a member of Ponca Nation of Oklahoma and also as a past district governor. And what I'd like to share with you guys today is just a little bit more about my tribe and really how that connects to Rotary for me. I joined Rotary about 11 years ago simply because I was asked. I really had no idea what Rotary was. I was in a new role at work and was, supposed to be engaged in the community. And I was approached at a Chamber of Commerce event to speak. And at the meeting, there was a familiar face in the audience, a coworker, former coworker, Charles Miller, who I later learned had 50 years of perfect attendance. And he asked me then, hey, did I want to join? But I'd like to take you a little further back to the year 1877, because I believe that I'm a Rotarian 100 years in the making. And so what I want to share with you guys today is the kind of the spirit of Rotary. And I know there are several people in our district and probably across the world where maybe they're a second generation Rotarian, or they have relatives that are Rotarians. And, that's not my story. I'm a first generation Rotarian, but I feel like I come from a long line of Rotarians. And so I'm going to explain a little bit here as I talk a little bit about my tribe. But my great-great-grandfather, Mark Buffalo, had a member of the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma, one of the two federally recognized tribes, the other being in Nebraska, where the original homelands were prior to the Trail of Tears. He walked here over 500 miles and is a Trail of Tears survivor. And so again, what does this have to do with Rotary? Well, back before there were Rotarians in that very same tribe as my great-great-grandfather, and on that same Trail of Tears walk, there was someone by the name of Chief Standing Bear, who lived, approximately from 1829 to 1908. And he was the chief of the Ponca tribe and was a Native American civil rights leader who successfully argued in U.S. District Court in 1879 in Omaha that Native Americans are persons within the meaning of the law and have the right of habeas corpus, thus becoming the first Native American judicially granted civil rights under the American law. So if you think about that for a minute, not persons under the law before them, having to prove in a court of law that you're a person. So to give you a little context, the reason that Chief Standing Bear was on trial was because he had left the reservation without permission. Since leaving Nebraska on that walk, nearly a third of the tribe died. And in January of 1879, Standing Bear's son, Bear Shield, died. The distraught chief, he decided to return to his tribal lands in Nebraska to bury his son, as he promised he would do, and was arrested as a result of that. So the trial of Standing Bear opened in Omaha in April of 1879. It lasted for 2 days. The attorneys representing the U.S. government again argued, simply that an Indian was neither a person nor a citizen within the meaning of the law, therefore couldn't bring a suit against the government, and were not entitled to rights and privileges of citizens. So as part of the trial, Chief Standing Bear was allowed to make a speech on his own behalf through an interpreter. And in doing research on this before talking as it's recorded in history, the story says that Standing Bear rose and only half facing the court, held out his right hand and stood there motionless. They said it was so long that the stillness of death, which had settled down on the audience, became almost unbearable. Finally, he looked up at the judge and said, "That hand is not the color of yours, but if I prick it, the blood will flow, and I shall feel pain. The blood is of the same color as yours. God made me, and I'm a man." So, every time, I hear that, just makes me want to tear up a little bit, but that's my tribe, and that's where I come from. And I'm very proud to be, a Ponca tribal member. So, obviously there's no Rotarians in 1879, but somehow I feel like they knew about a few of our missions. When you talk about people of action, check. Advancing world understanding, goodwill, and peace, check. Then I'd like to just fast forward a little bit to 1953. My late grandfather, Tom, he grew up poor on tribal reservation lands. He later joined the Army. He was a paratrooper, He returned to Ponca City where he met my grandmother, who's a white woman. And as you know, in 1957, that wasn't something that was really accepted within society. I mean, only about 1% of marriages in the US were interracial at the time. It was very commonplace, to have prejudice, especially where there's an Indian reservation. There weren't a lot of opportunities for him in our small town, and he was a very hardworking man. He wanted to do well for himself, so he moved away to the big city of Dallas, Texas, to raise his family. He made a very good living as a butcher and an entrepreneur. He opened several businesses where he worked until he died, until in his 80s. He would do anything for his family. He was well respected in his community. He was a kind, gentle man who would help anyone with anything they needed. So again, diversity and inclusion, check. Right, service above self, check. High ethical standards, check. Living the four-way test, check. So you get where I'm kind of going with this, because I feel that I'm a Rotarian over 100 years in the making. And so it's 2022 now. I'm standing here again as a proud member of the Ponca tribe, as the past district governor. It's an honor. And I hope that my great-great-grandfather would be proud knowing that I'm following the footsteps of our family because of them. And so many people before me, I don't have to be worried about being recognized as a person. I became the first person in the history of my family to ever graduate high school, let alone college. And today, I work from the comfort of my home. I've been able to travel the world. I have a lot of great things in my life. And while I have experienced outright prejudice in Rotary, I've never had to worry about being accepted due to my color. I've never had to worry about being accepted as a leader because of my gender. And I'm extremely privileged to have all that I do. So as I look back and think about these amazing things that people have done before me, the sacrifices that they made to get me to this point, people who really had so little, I'm compelled to share what I sometimes take for granted. And I want to be able to give back. And I think Rotary gives me an avenue to do that. On a huge scale. And I think as Rotarians, I think, you need to really think about the difference that you make. So my hope today, and just sharing this story with you and a little bit about my history, is that you'll think about who your next Rotarian in the making is. That person that's just waiting to be asked, a person that has the spirit of Rotarian, that person that may not look like you. Because there are a lot of people out there that we can really work to continue to be a diverse and inclusive organization. Thank you.
Wow, that's good stuff.
Yes, that's really inspiring. Thank you, Angela. So next is Tom Eagle Rising Libby, who is from Lowell, who is from the district that's sponsoring this event.
So welcome everybody. My name is Tom Eagle Rising Libby, and I'm of the Mi'kmaq tribal affiliation. I happen to be the chief of the Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association, which I think might be classified as one of the organizations that Tim was talking about a little while ago. We're an intertribal organization, so we don't have the same tribal structure that some of the reservations have, but we do have a governing body. We have elected people, which is why I'm here. I'm the chief of the organization, and I have been now, I think, for about 15 years or so. I try to give it up and people just keep electing me, and I don't know what that's all about, but we get you Rotarians know what I mean. I'm just saying. But anyway, so we're an intertribal organization. We do a lot of educational pieces surrounding the fact that we're still here. And one thing I found interesting talking with Angela, I actually was familiar with the trial of Standing Bear, because I found it fascinating that even with that, it didn't happen until 1923, where we were actually recognized as a people in general. 1944, when we became U.S. citizens. And then so on and so forth. There's 1968 that we got the same rights that everybody else got in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, with the exception of the freedom of religion, which didn't happen until 1978. So there's a lot of things that if you can go back and understand why a lot of Native people get frustrated when people ask us about inclusion and diversity and stuff like that, because if you haven't had a series of assimilation processes, then you probably don't even know what it's like. And a lot of times you'll meet people in the street, you won't even notice or recognize that they're Native at this point, because again, when we trace our ancestry, for me and my daughter, we're only 2 generations off the reservation, but yet if you met us on the street, you would make an assumption that I was one of those. How did Dr. Jenkins put it? Old white men, or I forget how he worded it, but you would just make that assumption about me just because of the color of my skin. And a lot of people don't realize that up here in New England, the color of our skin was relatively lighter. The Northeast, if you think about the very first description of Native peoples off the coast of Maine in Nova Scotia, back to the European countries, were light-skinned, and there's a couple other classifications that, lean, clean, light skin. And I was actually planning on reading you the excerpt, but I apologize, I didn't grab the book. But it was early. The fact that what I'm getting at is the color of our skin really shouldn't matter. You should really be asking questions about people. I love organizations or conferences like this, because it really gets you to think that you meeting somebody. And I like the way he used the shoe reference, because getting to know somebody at a deeper level will give you way more insights as to who they are and how they act and how they perform at work, but even in general in society, because we don't all, operate the same way, aside from our differences in race. Even you can pick 2 people that grew up in the same household, and you put them in certain environments, they'll react different. Your experiences and you as a whole person. But I digress. But to get back to GLICA, so the Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association is really all about education. Our job, what we feel our mission is to teach the people here in the Northeast that we're still here, that we haven't gone anywhere. We still have a population here. Just because we don't live on reservations doesn't mean we don't practice our culture. We, as an organization, we host 2 powwows every year. We also have other ceremonies and practices that we bring in, that is not open to the public, because we don't want the public spectacle of certain things like, planting ceremonies and harvest ceremonies. There's certain, things like that we go through. For me, I've spent the last 15 years, I've done lectures at colleges and universities throughout New England. I've been invited to schools, like Harvard and Brown and UMass Boston, UMass Lowell, a lot of the major colleges around here, and really just doing some groundwork, in my opinion, because no matter how often we go into a classroom or how often we give lectures, it's usually not enough, right? Like it's usually not, that 1.5 hour, or, the even if it, we had one school ask us to do a full day, no, sorry, 2 days. It was 2 days. It was a community college, and they asked us to do a 2-day seminar for them. And I felt like that wasn't even enough for 2 days for them to truly understand where we're coming from when it comes to all these problems and issues and concerns that we have in today's society. The other thing too that I'd just like to bring up real quick, when you think of, I often start some of these conversations with, and we don't have a big group here, so it's kind of, if you don't mind, if you can unmute and just yes or no, it's fine. Like, when you think of, when you see certain imagery and you see certain things and you say, like, for example, a dream catcher, when everyone sees a dream catcher, they, and again, just a yes or no, you assume that this is Native American, right? Like, or an indigenous dream catcher.
Yes,
Yeah.
from the Southwest.
Well, so that's the thing, right? So the dream catcher originally belonged to the Ojibwe people, or Chippewa people, sorry. So, that is, it's not a universal thing from coast to coast. Not everybody in the country prior to European contact used dream catchers. It was primarily an Ojibwe thing, or I shouldn't say thing, sorry, an Ojibwe piece of material. Things like Kokopelli. People see Kokopelli and they just immediately think, oh, that's a Native American symbol or Native American image. That's a Hopi image. It's not Native American. It belongs to a certain people. So this type of stuff happens quite often, where the general population sees a particular image or a particular thing. They just assume it's a universal term that they can say is Native American. And the reality of it is all of our people had different, slightly different, I shouldn't say completely different, but slightly different beliefs, thought processes, cultures, cultural habits, you know, so we had a lot of differences in those things. So just to assume that something is Native American or whatnot is not exactly the right way. So it goes back to what I was saying about Dr. Jenkins. It's easier to ask. I would rather somebody ask me a question that they feel uncomfortable with than make an assumption. So I appreciate the fact that you guys added me here, and I hope you guys have a lot of questions because we seem to have a lot of time on our hands and not a lot of people in the group. So hopefully we can open it up to a lot of really good questions.
Great.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ralph.
No, I just want to say thank you, Tom. That was great. I met Tom 2 years ago when he did a special presentation on a TV show. Cable TV show that we were doing. He was just outstanding. And he invited a whole bunch of us to come to his next powwow, which conflicts with Bedford Day. And at that, I brought a team of students who were going to videotape it to share the educational piece that he was talking about. And the interesting part that popped up, the mother of one of the children said, "Oh, Ralph, I got to tell you, I'm Cherokee." And I said, this is great. And, but she never even indicated that ever before. And I'd known her for quite a long time. But anyway, Tom, thank you so much. And Michaela was there too, and she was the star of the whole thing.
Yes, so Michaela.
Hi, so I'm also a council member of the Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association. I'm actually the youngest member right now. I'm only a college student, but as he said, they're elected positions. So I feel like I'm doing something right if I'm the youngest member right now, but I feel like I still have a lot to learn. And I understand that Rotary wanted like a younger perspective on this panel, but personally, I would never have asked because I feel like I'm too young to be here teaching other people or talking to other people about some of this stuff. But it's just very interesting. And the education aspect of GLICA is so important because growing up in public school, like we don't learn any of this stuff. And there's a reason why these public schools are asking us to go in, but just going in for one day, like he said, doesn't feel like enough. But hopefully things like these meetings over time will add to it and we'll get further along. But right now I'm at UMass Boston also, and I'm trying to get a group here similar to expand with the student Native group and maybe teach other people, other students about what's going on and some more cultural diversity here as well.
Thank you.
You know, Michaela, it might be cool to start a Rotaract club over there and using the networking of Rotary, we could bring your message to a higher level. That is really cool. I'm really glad you're with us.
So actually, we're small groups. So let me ask everybody else to introduce themselves. I'll start. I'm a past district governor in District 7040. That's all of the north part of New York State, and quite a few clubs in Canada. So we have Ottawa and Montreal clubs there are part of our district, which gives, I love that perspective. I think that in the US, we sometimes assume that Canadians are you're all like us, just same culture, but it's really, I really have learned a lot of the nuances about how we think. And as someone from the US, I have spoken to clubs in Ontario and in Montreal and put my foot in it for sure, because I just made that assumption that everyone was looking at the world my way, which I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's the first thing that we need to get over. Some people refer to that as implicit bias, but it's just recognizing we all have a picture of how the world is. So Tom had a great point. We need to ask questions. So Ralph, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, I'm past district governor for Central Massachusetts District. I live near Boston. So in Lowell is part of our district. And I just learned the other day that Tom is a former Rotarian from the Rotary Club of Lowell. And we had a lot of great, and they actually helped form the Rotary Club of Bedford. So Tom, thank you very much for being part of the club that got me going. For several years, I grew up in Bedford, Mass. I became an elementary school teacher in Bedford. And it wasn't until I retired from being a principal in Bedford, elementary school principal, when I started a literacy project in Nepal. And my very first flight to Nepal to work on this literacy program was the day after Thanksgiving. And sitting beside me on the plane was a Native American, and I'm still not sure about those correct names, which I hope we get to talk about, definitely an Indigenous person. He was at Plymouth Plantation or Plymouth Rock area, and he says, oh yeah, we consider Thanksgiving our national day of mourning. And we had a wonderful discussion the whole flight from Boston to LA, where he was had to change planes and fly back to Arizona where he was heading. But he flew all the way out to Plymouth to be there to help us understand the Indigenous people's vision of what really the first Thanksgiving she was really. He felt that his comment to me, which really opened my eyes, was that, well, we consider the Plymouth Plantation as our first public service to the to people that needed help because they basically were all starving to death, and it was the Indigenous people here that saved their life and allowed them to continue for more than just completely die out. They were the rescuers of the original settlers for the United States. And I said, whoa, I've been teaching all these years, like 27, and I haven't heard a word about that. And I'm glad what you said, Michaela. There's nothing in the curriculum. And in matter of fact, most of the stuff in the curriculum is incorrect. And we really have to work on getting the image, getting the right word out to the right people. And since then, I've really had a passion for keeping this sort of thing going. So I want to thank you all very much for turning out.
Thank you, Ralph, and thank you for all the effort you've put into making this happen. So, Victor, can we hear a little bit? We know you're district governor. Can we hear a little bit more?
Sure. I live around the corner from Ralph. But yeah, my parents came over in 1948. So I'm a first generation born in the United States. But in terms of Indigenous people, I'm just in awe about some of the projects that Rotary has done, not only in our district, but on the Cape Cod district for sending supplies up to Indigenous folks up in Northern Canada. And as Ralph knows, I'm a technologist and went to school at MIT. And I recently learned that in my class of 72, there were two other district governors from Alaska. And one of their, they do a lot of service work for their Indigenous folks up on the northern slopes of Alaska. And one of my interests was to find out how they did a water project. And that water project was fascinating because it was not funded by Rotary. That would have taken too long. They actually got federal funding for a project, which so what happens a lot of times is they have a lot of winter storms up in Alaska, and it will wipe out their fresh water supplies. And so their previous solutions was to, by airlift, drop pallets of bottled water to these Indigenous communities. And so he had an idea to actually develop a water desalination system that could be airdropped by helicopter. And the cost of this system was about a couple of days worth of bottled water. And so that was a great solution, innovative solution from Rotary. So I love those kinds of stories where Rotary can help with Indigenous folks, and not only Indigenous folks, but underdeveloped communities, worldwide. So that was my passion. I almost did not become a Rotarian. And this goes back to what was Angela said, somebody asked her to be a Rotarian. So my grandfather and my father were Rotarians. And so I always wanted to be a Rotarian. But growing up, I said, oh, I want to be an engineer. That's why I went to MIT. And so I left, high school to go up to Boston, knowing in my mind that to be a Rotarian, you had to own your own business. That was the old way of thinking. You had to own your own business. You had to be chief of police or chief of fire department, some big wig in your community. And so, I graduated in 81. It wasn't until 2006. That's, like 25 years of missed opportunity. So what happened was my neighbor, Gordon Feltman, down the street, he was walking with me. He says, Victor, have you ever thought of thinking of Rotary? And I told him, I know all about Rotary. My grandfather's a Rotarian, my father's a Rotarian, but I can't be a Rotarian because I don't own my own business. I'm just an engineer. And he said, oh, Victor, Rotary has changed. And you can even be a woman now. And so that's the year I joined Rotary. So the lesson is just ask. Like Angela was just ask.
That's a good message, to just ask. Linda, would you like to? And I know you're connected with HIP, aren't you? You're muted still.
Yes, I am the HIP coordinator for District 5050, which is on the west coast of Canada. I live in the Vancouver area, and I am past president. I belong to the Oregon Jack Creek Reserve up in the interior of BC, and there's not much more to say. I actually have to leave. I have another meeting. I was actually just typing to let people know I can't stay for the whole session, but I'm glad you let me at least introduce myself.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Really nice meeting everyone.
Debbie.
Hi there. I am not involved in Rotary. My father-in-law, though, was a Rotarian for many years out in Ashburnham. So I am on staff at Sudbury Valley Trustees, which is a regional land trust. I know, Ralph, I recognize you. You recognized my members. So basically Bedford, and so I live in Sudbury, Massachusetts as well, and our region goes all the way up to Lowell and down to like Upton and in the south. And so land is our business as a nonprofit, and the reason I kind of jumped on this summit today, I feel like I honestly don't even know where it came across my path, but I was like, oh, this is happening on Saturday, I'm signing up. I'm one of the leaders at SVT who is helping to coordinate our transformation into being a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. Many of you might have known the legacy of land conservation and environmentalism is very racist and a difficult past that we're kind of inheriting, I guess. And so our organization is really taking a close look at a number of aspects. And one of them is our relationships with the people who, you know, lived on the land before people owned the land. It's been a really interesting journey though, because to be honest, I'm constantly like, I'm interested in all the different aspects from, you know, underprivileged people to, you know, issues of people of color being in the woods, and as well as like land acknowledgements and making, you know, starting to have connections with Indigenous people. I mean, one thing that I can't believe is I grew up in the town of Framingham, which is right here. And I'll tell you, I never heard the term Nipmuc or knew that there was a Nipmuc Nation, which are the folks that, you know, are from, you know, this area, this region. And so recently it's just been just so fascinating to kind of, you know, learn the stories that have been really buried for many years. And so I'm here to because I'm always looking for opportunities to learn really how to try to shift the work that we do so that it benefits everyone in our region and not, I like to say, like a slice of people in the region. And it really starts with getting to know everyone in the region. So thank you for having me. And it's really a great opportunity to learn with other people. So thank you.
Debbie,
Jesse.
I think we have a big opportunity for future grants to work together. Let's keep in touch. I'm thrilled you.
No, yeah, let's definitely talk after this, Ralph.
Yes.
So Debbie, we're really honored to have you here. Thank you. Bill, would you like to tell us about yourself and Peace Builder District? That sounds really interesting.
Yes, my district 5080 covers Western Washington, Southeastern British Columbia, and Northern Idaho. And we're one of 30 global Peace Builder districts in the world. And really what it takes is a pretty major contribution to the peace centers and maintenance of that contribution. Primarily my role in the district is I'm the foundation chair for 5080. I'm also the Peace Committee co-chair. Outside of my district, I am the vice president of Waterton Glacier International Peace Park Association, which it's a Rotary group made up of 4 districts that supports the Peace Park, which was established in 1932. It's the first international peace park in the world, established by Rotarians from Canada and the United States. And it basically encompasses the lands of Waterton Lakes National Park in Alberta and Glacier National Park in Montana. So as you can imagine, we have some lands that are traditionally the traditional lands of several groups, including the Blackfoot, Blackfeet, Métis, Salish, Stoney, few others that are basically in that area. And one of the things that we've been struggling with right now, membership, directorship for the association is limited to Rotarians from the 4 districts. And we have been attempting to develop relationships with the local Indigenous groups, tribes, nations to become part of this through membership with Rotary. And we're finding that there's a huge reluctance to join Rotary. There's apparently a cultural limitation in this particular area that if you belong to the tribe, you don't belong to anything else. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to work on, where we have an Indigenous work group that's trying to bring people in. So I don't know if that's the, true, how, there's that feeling, but I know that there's some pretty recent hard feelings with a number of different projects. So for instance, in the area that I live in the area that's southeastern Washington. When the Manhattan Project took over Hanford, several nations or tribes were displaced because of that, and so there's hard feelings with regard to that as well. So that's basically what we do. We support the Waterton Glacier Peace Park, which is a combination of those two parks, and we're trying to develop a stronger relationship with the local Indigenous groups. That's basically. I grew up in Massachusetts, by the way. I was in Western Massachusetts in the Springfield area. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Bill. We'll get to you in a minute, Cliff, but it seemed to me, Bill, that you were really asking a question, and I just wanted to give a moment here if anyone has any comments or suggestions for developing relationships with your local Indigenous people.
Well, I know that I just found out before she left that Linda is part of HIP in my general area. She's in 50/50, I'm in 50/80. So I'm going to make a connection with her. That's one of the things that I'm going to be doing. But as far as anything else, trying to develop those relationships, it's been difficult, and we're trying to do it in an inclusive way. What are your needs, as opposed to this is our do you want to join us? We're trying to do the concept of how can we address your needs, and would you be interested in partnering with us in order to promote the concept of peace building and environmental sustainability. So those are the two major elements that we're involved with at Waterton Glacier.
Okay. All right.
So Bill, this is Victor.
Yes.
Have any organizations been successful in partnering with these tribes to do service projects at all? I know our church goes on reservations and yearly does some service projects.
Yeah, I'm not aware of groups that have done that. I think that's one of the things that we need to do, is to identify, who has provided service, what kind of service, and so forth, and then work from there.
Yeah, and then you could partner with those organizations to get your foot in the door. That will develop the trust, I think.
Okay.
When I was a principal, I started to organize teacher exchange. And actually, we did a principal exchange with Nepal, which got me interested in working there and building a literacy program. But I linked up with the Athabascans up your way, and we kind of had a project going. It didn't materialize, and I'm not sure what broke down, but there was some interesting dialogue back and forth to, how can we make this actually happen? That we could, get a sharing for, I do know we did send a teacher to Norway for a month, and we tried to do the flip side of the person coming here as the Nepal principal came here. But yeah, I think partnering, sharing of some way would be kind of an exciting thing to do, especially to make help build the awareness of the children in an elementary school, for example.
So can I ask you a question, Mark? So is there a question for the panel here?
Yes, yes. Anybody,
Yes.
anybody here that has some input and suggestions?
Jump in.
To Bill, and I haven't forgotten our other panel people, but it seemed like he was asking for some input. So yes, any panelists that could help
Yeah.
him, that would be great. I will say that as far as I know, and I can be corrected, I think every district in Canada has a HIP coordinator.
Okay,
That should be a good resource for you.
okay. I'm not sure if our district does, but I'll look into that.
Okay, so I see Angela and Tom have both unmuted themselves. Angela, you want to go first?
Sure. I think some of the ways that I would just suggest that perhaps maybe not necessarily just looking at opportunities to do service for those particular communities, but to be more partners, right? So I think some communities can maybe look down maybe at, as potential, they don't need charity, right? I would say that in our community, especially in Oklahoma, the tribal nations are all very much invested in communities with funding for county road in the schools. And even with COVID, the tribal nations who actually got the shots well before other communities did actually shared that with other communities. So I would look for opportunities to partner on ways that we can serve the community versus ways that we can, help. Because I think there are a lot of, programs that are available to tribes that they might have, federally, but just again, I think to me, I don't know that, I know a lot of groups in my area have not maybe done this well. And so this is an opportunity even for, where I live at, that just being able to, partner at a different level and bring them to the table versus trying to serve Indigenous people. So.
Great point. Tom.
I mean, I was going to say something similar, Angela. So I'll echo the sentiment where just got to be careful you don't come across as being, I guess, a charity is the word you use. So I'll just keep it that that you're trying to do them, you're doing them, you're doing something, you're doing it them, you're doing, including them and inviting them to the table is definitely the direction that I would go as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to have a million questions and be ready. I would also say just prepare yourself for them to be, I don't want to use the word negative. It's not negative, but defensive, not defensive. There's a word I'm losing, escaping the word right now. But
Cautious.
Yeah, cautious. Yeah, for sure. But you may have to do some work to overcome that, and not just simply just expect that like you're inviting another organization to a table versus it's not the same. So just be weary of that and include, invite them. Don't dictate to them, and don't present it as a charitable thing, but inviting them is definitely the way I would go as well.
Yeah, one of the things that we've decided right from the start with this, we've been working on this for a number of years and really have not made any inroads, is that we cannot present ourselves as the great white father. That's something that won't work. We have to, basically what you said, invite, ask for participation, ask for collaboration, and respect views and opinions, and which is all part of DEI. So that's something that I think that we all need to make sure. That's one of the reasons why I'm here. Is I didn't realize that there was an Indigenous breakout, and I'm very happy that it's here. But it's to gather greater knowledge on how to be inclusive. And
the other thing I
starts
would recommend
inclusive.
too, Bill, how I was talking about earlier, each one of those tribal affiliations may have their own customs as to how you approach their tribal government. So make sure I would check into that too, making sure how. I'm not talking about picking up the phone versus an email. Like there's ways to address certain tribal affiliations have differences on how you address their elders and their leadership. So just make sure you're aware of that before going into it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
That person I chatted with on the plane flying from the program at Plymouth, he said, you know, all you white people, you were our first welfare people, and we were the ones that got you through the winter. And I said, geez, you're right. That never made it in the history books.
Okay, so thank you. That was really a really great question, Bill. So Cliff, I want to invite you to talk a little bit, and you might want to drop in any question that you're thinking of asking. This would be the time. That would be great.
Well, Cliff Rober, I'm the immediate past district governor, living down the road from both Ralph and Victor in the same town. I guess I became more interested in this area because my mother moved out to Phoenix, and while she was out there, she basically went to different jewelry and art shows and things, but she adopted somewhat a Native American family. They called her grandma and mother, and therefore I became not by blood, but I became the person's brother, and their kids are my nieces and nephews, and my kids consider them the nieces and nephews, their brothers and sisters. So that's how I really became interested. And basically, I've heard a little bit from their perspective. They're Navajo, and I truly was honored when we went to one of the daughter's wedding, which was on the reservation in their hugan, and we were treated as though we were brothers, and we were at the ceremony, and that was really touching to be able to see a Native American ceremony, Navajo, in person. And I've always had a deep relationship with them, and my mother's been passed away now for 21 years, and we still have a great relationship. And so that's why I'm interested. I'd like to see, not how I can help them, because they're family now. It's just understanding and getting to know more Navajos and more Indigenous people in different parts of the area.
Thank you, Cliff. So, and I think you make an important point, because sometimes as Rotarians, I apologize for using this word, but sometimes as Rotarians, I think we behave like settlers and assume that somehow as Rotarians, we're in some way better or have something more to offer other people, not recognizing that everybody is equal and everybody has something to offer, particularly if we ask. So Colleen, I know you came to us late, but we're all talking a little bit about who we are and asking questions of our panelists. So if you would like to join in, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Colleen Coons. I'm in District 5495, which is actually Arizona. I'm somewhat new to Rotary. I have been here for about 2 years, and I just retired, so now I have more time to give to Rotary. So I'm currently the district chair for our Rotaract group in our Arizona Rotaract, which leads you down the path. Once I think you get involved in one avenue, then it leads to another and another and another, and now I'm on our DEI committee. So I've been jumping around to the different breakout sessions and listening, And your breakout session really caught my ear because I had the opportunity to go to Kenya and live in the Maasai land for about a week on a Interact program where we took 5 interactors to distribute mobility devices. And what I've learned is, I can't remember who said this, but what I learned is, I'll give you the example. Our district put a water tower there in Maasai land, which is the indigenous people and the Maasai warriors, and they're primarily pastoral types of groups. They live one with the environment, and it's probably the top 2 most destinations for game drives because you get to see the big 5, right? But living amongst them only for a week, so my viewpoint is anecdotal, is that when we put in the water tower, we as Rotarians put in the water tower, the question came up within the communities of, well, do you want water piped to your homes? Do you want water piped closer to where you live? And because we wanted to, quote, save the women from having to do that duty of walking to the Talek River with water barrels on top of their head, traveling, 10 miles back home and sanitizing it. Rotarians, or we, wanted to save the women and women's rights, and that's another path, right? What we learned, or what I learned, and this is second, third hand news now, is women didn't want the water piped to their homes. They just wanted access to clean water so that they can now, instead of spending that time getting water, maybe they can send their child to school. Right? They have the opportunity to do more with their time. So I typed in the chat, it's not, and this was a learning experience for me. It wasn't that you go there and you put our value system and our cultural system on them. They don't want to change, but they do have a right to access to clean water. I also believe they should have a right to access to sanitation. I believe the right. That's why I'm a Rotarian. So it was a learning experience. So what that taught me, which is something I strive to always do, is listen first, seek to understand, and then apply what I or we can do for them in a collaboration. I think one person here, maybe it was Angela, that said partnership. So that's who I am. Excited to be a Rotarian, excited to be part of this. Certainly Rotary keeps you busy, but I have to put my plug in. District 5495, Arizona Rotaract. We have a website, azrotaract.org. Please take a look at us. We're rebuilding since COVID, so thank you.
Thank you. And something that we didn't really mention before we started with this is that this particular breakout is just about mostly Indigenous people in what is now known as Canada and the US, but there are certainly Indigenous people around the world and are with many, many different issues. So thank you for bringing that perspective to us.
Yeah, and so then one last thing, I can bring it here locally in Arizona. I believe the Navajo Nation, Ralph or Cliff, you mentioned it. Right here in our backyard on the Navajo Nation, they don't have access to clean water. So I believe we're doing a couple of water projects right in our own backyard as well. So thanks, Cliff, for the lesson in how being part of the family is important.
Yeah, for those of you that are from Canada, I think 1 or 2 issues ago, the Rotarian magazine featured a water project on the Navajo Nation. It's definitely an issue still. So we have a bit of time left. Does somebody have a burning question they would like to ask?
I do.
Okay.
Should have been the very first question. I have a disability, and in the older days, I was called having special needs, and that word isn't even used anymore. And I'm not even sure what the proper current up-to-date technology is in referring to indigenous people. Is it, I don't think Indian will work. From the panel, what terminology should we use just to say we're working with the indigenous people? Is that the only word, or what's offensive? What isn't? What can we do? How do we say it?
So you're probably not going to like this answer because I don't think there's one right answer.
Ah.
So I will and just tell you from obviously my perspective, and it's going to be different from where you live, but I think many people are very proud to be Indians. If you talk about like BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, that govern tribes, or Indian Health, right? Like, but maybe it's more offensive if it's coming from someone else. So what I think Native American, for these parts, if you wanted to be safe, perhaps that is perfectly acceptable. But I think the best thing you can do is just ask, right? Because I think it is going to potentially vary. And I know in Canada, there's definitely some different language that they might use, and a lot of tribes again may just refer to hey, I'm not Indian, I'm Ponca, right? Or because Tom talked about that a lot earlier, right? Like just assuming everyone is just the same when we're really not. So
Okay.
Tim, did you have a spin on that being up in Canada?
I think that was covered very well. Up here, for a while, they were using the term Aboriginal peoples. So when Canada pursued having its constitution repatriated or patriated from Great Britain in 1982, they included a few clauses that relate to us, and they use the term Aboriginal peoples, and they define that as Indians, Inuit, and Métis. And in their terminology, Indians means anyone who's registered by the federal government as an Indian, which doesn't necessarily coincide with our views of ourselves. And because none of those, whether it's registration or those kinds of definitions, none of them respect our diversity. So when we talk about ourselves, we of course talk about the nations we come from. We usually have terminology that relates to original peoples as a whole. So region by region, you will hear those terms utilized. So some aspects of terminology are situational, right? So if you're talking about the whole circumstance of indigenous peoples in the United States, if you want to talk generally about history and the history of the relationships between the U.S. and indigenous peoples, but you're going to try to find terminology that you think is acceptable, that encompasses the diversity yet the broad range of peoples that you're talking about. So up here, after the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we're able to successfully do away with the use of the word Aboriginal peoples. We saw it as saying we're not indigenous to here, and the word Indigenous peoples has grabbed on. It has spread like wildfire. It's the main way we use to identify, the collective of collectives. So when you're talking about an individual, they'll talk about an indigenous person. But in terms of groups, nations, it would be indigenous peoples.
Yeah, I've started using the term indigenous a bit more frequently than, or Native American. Indigenous peoples and Native American I've been using sort of interchangeably. The one that I don't use that frequently is Indian, mostly because of from a historical factor. you know, the where we think the term Indian came from is not even the real thing. Like a lot of people think that you know, this people were looking for the country of India, and when they found the Americas, they thought they were in India, so they called them India. That's actually not 100% true. The country of India did not exist in 1492. There was no such country. It was actually called Hindustan. It was, so when they came here, and the writings that went back to the crowns of Europe, when they were using the term Indios, they were talking about in the light of God. So they thought they found a people that were put here by God, him or herself, not, so they were talking about Indios, meaning the representation of their God, not India. So I have a problem with the term Indian, although I know that our people still use it in general. So I don't vilify people for using it. I just prefer not to use it because it's a misrepresentation of where the word came from. So hopefully that helps you, Ralph.
Yeah,
I don't know if Michaela, if you wanted to add anything to the three of that.
Well, in terms of like specifically Indian, kind of like how Angela mentioned with like the BIA and everything, it's like I don't like the term, but sometimes you need to use the term Indian because it's written into our laws, the Indian Acts and everything. So it's like even if we want to get away from it, we kind of can't. But yeah, I don't really like that term. Native American, Indigenous, even First Nation, which isn't really as common. Any of those I'm fine with.
But we would probably prefer, like Angela also said, as you're talking to us about our own people, refer to me as Mi'kmaq, not
yeah.
Native or Ponca or Mohawk, or, you know, that's
Yeah,
probably
because
the more
imagine if
proper.
like all of North America is a continent. So like imagine Europeans, like you never distinctively mention their countries. You're just saying, oh, the Europeans all the time. Like the individual nations are also important.
So when I see my friend Erin, I can say, and she's a Cherokee, and she should, and that would make her very proud to hear that, I would guess. Yes.
Actually, impress her, Ralph, and call her Salagi.
Uh-oh, Salahi. Sure how to pronounce it. That's
Yeah.
part of my disability. Are there other issues about like stereotypes or problems like that become a problem, or?
Sure, you asked that question with 5 minutes left. I don't know if we have enough time to go through all that. I don't know, stereotype. I don't know, Angela, if you want to start on that one.
Sure. I mean, just I think, you know, I was teasing yesterday when we were talking about this, but, you know, a lot of times I'll meet people and like, you know, if I, you know, tell them what tribe I'm from, they'll say, well, hey, my grandmother was a Cherokee princess, right? Like apparently everyone is a Cherokee princess.
Oh.
So it becomes a little, and they just, I mean, you know, I laugh at it sometimes, right? But, or, you know, like, hey, my family's Indian, we just can't prove it, we lost our paperwork, right? Or I'm going to do an ancestry DNA test to find out if I'm a native, right? And I think, you know, while maybe there is some heritage there, I think, a lot of it could be defined more, you know, like let's be specific, right? What maybe you have heritage, but you know, if you're a tribal member, you know, of a, you know, nation can, you know, make a difference too. So it's just, I think people want to relate. So I never try to, you know, take offense to that, but it is, you know, a very common response that you get from individuals. So.
Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add for stereotypes?
Not my favorite part of the discussion. When you have a situation where we live in a colonial environment, stereotypes often have a close relationship to racism, and that requires a much longer discussion than the 3 minutes we have left in the group.
I agree, sir. Michaela, I'll let you go before me if you want. If you have anything like what are the stereotypes that you have or want to talk about, because they're going to cut us right at 1:30 5:30, they're just gonna shut the sessions off, so.
I mean, I don't really know what to say with such a broad topic, like stereotypes altogether, but I don't know.
Do you have one that stands out to you that you think is a little silly or ridiculous or funny, or I don't know the right question there, but
Maybe not right off the top of my head. I don't know.
I think one of the ones that I don't like, I'll just chime in real quick, so we only have 2 minutes, but I hate when you introduce yourself to people as Indigenous or First Nations or whatnot, and they go, "Oh, really? What percentage?" That just burns me. I don't understand why people still ask this question, but because you never hear that question asked of any other race, not one. If somebody says that they're Italian or Irish or French, you never hear anybody ask what percentage. So I usually tell them it's my left pinky. And I'm missing my turquoise today. I usually come back with some sort of wise guy remark, and then I explain. I'll go into detail explanation as to why the kind of, like Tim was saying, that you know, there's a colonization problem with that question. It's not an Indigenous problem. It's a colonizational problem with that question. So I explain to them why that works and why that happens. But that one kind of bugs me a bit.
Yeah, I think, Tom, like, if you think about it, right, you know, like, there's no other aspect where you have to prove your blood quantum.
Exactly.
So, right, like, if I have what's called a CDIB, a certificate degree of Indian birth, that proves my blood quantum, no other race has to do that. And it's not cool to us that we have to do that, that our ancestors had to do that to be part of a role by the government, right? But so if you think about that, I think that's just another injustice in terms of, you know, colonization, and that has been, you know, put upon us as tribes in that way. So.
And to Tim's point, a form of racism. That's a form of racism amongst itself. So,
right.
But again, that I think that topic alone could probably be an entire breakout session. So.
Yep.